Hi guys, and welcome to another IBM BPM technical tutorial. In this edition, we're going to look at a new capability that's recently been added to BPM, which is the ability to call REST services through what are called open-auth or Swagger definitions. So there's a lot in this one, so we'll take it slowly, but I think you'll like what you're going to see. So we're going to start off with the notion that we can have a REST service. Now, the REST service, of course, is a service which responds to a HTTP request that arrives over, well, an HTTP protocol over a TCP/IP network. Here is an example REST service that is using Node.js and JavaScript as the implementation language. Now, in our story here, BPM isn't going to be at this time concerned with the supplier of the REST service. So you can assume that you have a REST service out there in your own environment, hosted by Bluemix, in your own network, or somewhere on the internet. And this is an example of a Node.js application which basically listens for an incoming REST request. Now, when a REST request arrives, it's going to be of this form, and it's going to be responding with hello and then the name of the parameter passed in. So here, if we send a REST request to myapp/test with the property name equals and then somebody's name, it should respond with hello and then those parameters. So let's start off by testing our REST request. Let's copy this into our clipboard. Let's go over to a browser. Let's paste that in. Let's hit the enter key and we get a JSON string back which says hello Neil, and if I change this to be Bob, it comes back and says hello Bob. So great, we have a running REST service. Now obviously that has nothing to do with BPM, but it shows that we have a sandbox REST request that we can send REST requests to. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create ourselves an OpenAPI network connect definition. Let's try that again. We're going to create an OpenAPI description of the service that we're going to connect to. So OpenAPI is a text document which describes the nature of a REST service provider. If this had been web services, then we might have called such a specification a WSDL document. But in the REST world, this is called an Open API document. And it used to be known as Swagger, but that's neither here nor there. It's an Open API description document. Now, the OpenAPI description document can be described either in JSON or in a different document format called YAML, which stands for yet another markup language. Now, the creation of the YAML document, which describes the REST service, that can be entered in a notepad or other text editor. But I'll tell you, that's rather cumbersome. Fortunately, there's a free download from IBM called API Connect. And if one downloads API Connect, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, that's another story, but if one downloads API Connect, one can start up a tool called the API Designer, and that is a browser-based tool, and we open up in a browser-based editor. So I can come over here and I can create a new OpenAPI definition, and I'm going to call it test BPM, and what I'm doing is I'm defining here a REST request. So now we get to fill in the details. What's my base path? Well, it's going to be my app. And where do I get that from? If we look back here, it's the name of my host followed by my app followed by the name of the path. So my app is the name of my service. And any additional properties here? Nope, we're all good. So I'm going to change this to none. No security at this point. And then I say, come along and create me an API. And now I can scroll through this list and I can create the definition of the API. So I'm not going to fill in the ones we don't care about, but my scheme is going to be HTTP. My host is going to be localhost colon 3000. That is where my service is listening upon. It's listening upon port number 3000 here on localhost. Let's go back to my editor. Here we go. We're working with JSON data. That's the default. Scroll down. Don't need to enforce it using an API gateway. Security definitions. I'm going to use basic auth as my security. That's a security type, and I'm going to say I'm using basic auth. No extensions, no properties. We'll come back to paths in a moment. And definitions, this is data types. Now I'm going to create a new data type here, and I'm going to call this a greeting data type, which is a object, and that object has a property, and the property is going to have a name in it called greeting, which is a string. So if we look at this, that's got a property called string of a data type called greeting. Now why am I entering that? Because we're returning a greeting here as my data type, which contains within it the response values. And this will become clear as we carry on. Become clear as we carry on. So I've defined a property called greeting in the data type of greeting. Now I can go up to my path, and in my path is going to be called test. And in my parameters for my path, it's going to have an operation ID called hello. And in the parameters, we're going to add a new parameter, and the parameter is going to be called name. And name is going to be a string data type. And we're going to return a response, which is a greeting. Now, if all of that seemed horribly complicated, don't worry about it just now. We'll spend time on it later. But what we've done by defining these definitions here is that we've created ourselves a OpenAPI definition, also known as a Swagger definition. And this file contains the details of our REST service. So another way of saying that is, if this is a REST service provider, as a provider of this REST service, it's very likely your REST service provider will also provide this open API definition such that you can now consume that service. Well, that's great. That's wonderful. Now we can come over here and we can actually test it. So if I go over here to my, if I save this and I come up to my Explore tab over here, I'm now looking at my BPM1 definition. I think that's what I called it. Wasn't that what I called it? Let me check. 1 second. So my APIs, I called it test BPM. So we come over to my test BPM service, and I come over to Explore, and it's the test BPM service. And now over here, I can scroll along. I've got this service already running. I can scroll down here, and now I can put in a test of this. For example, enter a name. Put in the name Neil, hit the call operation button, and if we scroll down, it says hello Neil. So what I'm actually doing is I am calling my REST service after having provided this API Connect definition, which generated the Swagger documentation. And still, we've done nothing related to BPM. All I've demonstrated so far is using API Connect to create a REST Swagger OpenAPI definition that can be used to call the REST service. Now, if we close this out, if I now come over here to my source definition, if I copy this OpenAPI definition and paste that into a text file, and now save the text file, I now have, using API Connect, created a YAML file which describes my REST service. Now, Now I can move over to my BPM environment. So in BPM, we'll find that we have a new entry called external services. This is new in the latest service packs for the BPM 857 product. So from service pack or cumulative fix pack September 2016 or 9 2016, we will find this new capability. We come over to external service. I say I want to create a new external service. I want to discover an existing service. Hit the next button. Browse for local files, Swagger. I'm now going to bring up my file selector here. I'm going to select the YAML file, which I did save, yes, the YAML file here that was saved at this time. I'm now going to open that, go to the next button. It finds the hello operation that we defined in the YAML document. Come to next. We're going to create a new server definition. Create a new server definition called service server 1. Hit the finish button. And now we have found that BPM has created for us a service definition that, if it were called, would invoke my REST service. So look at that. Look what we've done here. We now have an entity where, without having to do any coding, if I now called this entity, it would cause the REST service to be invoked. And all I had to do was point at the YAML document which I created through API Connect. Now let's prove that works. Let's now create a stub service. Let's create a service flow, and we'll call it call REST. Hit the finish button. And in my service definition, I drag in here a new artifact, and I'm going to say this is a service task, and it's going to call my service. Is that what I called it? I think that's what I called it. Let's see. What did I call it? Yeah, I called it unimaginatively, I called it service. So we're going to call service. I'm going to rename this to be call my greeting. We're going to look at what it wants as inputs and outputs. And, did I map it? Yes. We're going to say it's going to call the operation hello, and it's going to have inputs of a name and outputs of a greeting. So the greeting was the business object that was automatically discovered by introspecting the YAML definition. So let's create ourselves a variable. We'll create an input variable. We'll call it name of type string, and we'll create an output variable which we'll call greeting of type greeting. There it is. Good. And we'll come over back to my diagram. We'll map this to be name. We'll map this to be greeting. We will wire these together. Easier said than done. We will wire these together. So I'm going to call my greeting. We come over here, we wire this, and we're about ready to call it, except I haven't given a default value to the name. So I'm going to say, what shall we call this one? We will call this one Stephanie. And we've provided a parameter called Stephanie here. And save this. And now I come over to my diagram, so this should work. Let's step through this. What happens if I hit the run button? Oh, it runs and we don't know what happened, so let's run it under our debugger. And we'll call it here. We will step over this activity, and we should have completed, and we will see that the output here from this activity is hello Stephanie. Now where did that come from? It passed in the name Stephanie here as the input, and we got hello Stephanie as the output. Now the only place that could have come from was the running of the service here. So let's change the web service implementation. Let's say goodbye. We'll save the REST service here. We'll come back up to my code. We will rerun the REST service provider. We will rerun this activity. We will step over this service, and now it comes back and says in the greeting, "Goodbye, Stephanie." And that's how easy it is to execute a REST-based service provider in the new BPM, as long as we have an OpenAPI YAML document. And if we don't have one, this is how easy it is to create an OpenAPI YAML document by using API Connect. And once we have this document, it becomes a breeze in order to use that in IBM BPM. I hope you found something useful in this presentation, and I look forward to more in the future. Thanks now, and bye-bye.